Hi, Phil.
Good morning, Sandy.
How you doing?
It's like the first time you've seen me today.
How are you?
It was weird. I stopped at the ATM on the way here, and there was a guy outside the ATM, and he was standing on one leg. I said, "Dude, what are you doing?" He said, "Checking my balance."
I can.
How are
That's-
you today, Connie?
I'm good. How are you?
We'd love to hear just a little bit about if you would introduce yourself to our listeners.
I'm still laughing at that joke, bro. So my name is Connie Pacheco, and I am the proud owner of Recoveries R US, and we're a vocational training over in New York City for the provision of CASAC, recovery coaching, and peer advocate, and then all the classes that have to do with the renewal of those three credentials.
What's CASAC stand for?
That's the credential for the state of New York for counselors to work in treatment programs
And how long have you been doing that work?
since 1987.
Wow.
That was a good year.
It was a good year.
Yeah, that was
Was
the
it
year
awesome?
that was the year I got into recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 1985 was even a better year. That's the year that I got into this process.
A year or
And
two.
then 3 years later,
You're far too young to get into recovery in 1985. What were you, like 8 years old or something like that?
shit, bless you. I was pretty young though. I was in my let me see, I was 23.
Yeah, so we like to dive in a little bit to where you grew up. What was life like growing up for you? Anything you'd like to share about that?
Sure. So I was born in Puerto Rico, and we migrated here when I was about 5, I think it was.
How did that come to pass? That's a big decision for a family.
I know. And it was my grandmother who had like 10 kids. And I guess that, I'm going to tell you a story. I remember her saying, because I hated the fact that we were coming to Puerto Rico. In fact, the name of my book is not out yet, but it will be, is, well, why couldn't we just go back home? Because my trajectory here in New York was horrible. And I remember my grandmother telling my mother, who, by the way, was my aunt, because my biological mother gave me to her sister. And I remember the conversation vaguely about how, the word gold came about, like there's a lot of gold in New York City, there's a lot of, right? And I remember I didn't want to come because I had my mango tree. I had my little broken dolls. I had dirt to play with. I had a dog. It was so free. And, I didn't wear shoes. I just love where I grew up. And I love my island. And when we got here, it was cold. And I was like, what the hell is this? Like, why? Why can't we just go back home? And then we went into an apartment that was a railroad apartment. And it was in the South Bronx. And that the building was occupied basically by my entire family, like my grandmother's daughters, right? And in one apartment, we had like 3 families. And one of those families was my biological family, my brothers and sisters, right? Which for some reason I knew they were my brothers and sisters, but like nobody ever said, these are your brothers and sisters. I just sort of kind of knew that this is my mom and this is my aunt and these are your brothers and sisters, like that. And I hated that they wanted me, the toilet had a tank with a chain that you pull. And when we had a latrine, we had an outhouse. And when my mother showed me that, listen, it was culture shock for me. When I saw that thing, when she pulled the chain and the toilet flushed, I ran like I was like, no way I'm going to sit in there because that thing is going to suck me up, like I could just picture myself going down the drain. I was like, no way, so that was like potty training all over again, I suppose. I was freaked out by the pipes, which had heat. Like, why is heat coming out of the pipes? Like, what the hell is this? And, I got burned from it a couple of times. We had a dumbwaiter where you put the garbage and you put it and it goes down. And I was so scared of that because I was like, oh my God, it's never coming back. If you ever go in there, and I guess my brother and sister used to like bully me, if we put you there, you will never come back kind of thing. It was a really scary place. Yeah, I couldn't stand it. And all I wanted to do was to just go back home. And I remember, back in the days in the streets, in the sidewalks of New York City, the sidewalks were made with glass, the sand, and they would glisten like sparkle, right? So I took a hammer and a screwdriver and I went to the sidewalk and I broke it into pieces and I brought it back home and I said, here's the goal. Can we please go back home? And my
Wow.
mother beat the crap out of me because the super from in front of the bodega came upstairs and says, look what your daughter did to the sidewalk. And I was so confused because I was like, well, I have the goal. Let's just get the hell out of here. That was my thought, right? And now that I look back at it, it was kind of funny, but not really, because I was so certain that with this is the goal my grandmother was talking about. Let's get the hell out of here. No.
Let me ask you a question. I'm gonna bring you back. Why?
Um,
What did your biological mom give you to her sister? Do you know why?
well, here's the story, right? So my mother had uh nine nine kids. One had passed away, so she had 8 kids. So my sister was, when I was born, my sister was 10. My brother must have been 9. My other sister must have been 8. My other brother must have been about 7.
Yeah.
Then the brother that I follow must have been 1 year old because he's a year older than me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the story is that I was a breech baby, and back in those days, my mother had to have a surgery, and it was a really big surgery. They cut up her whole stomach or whatever, and so I was fine, but she had to stay in the hospital to recover. So my sister, who would have been 10 at that time, couldn't take care of all those kids. So they gave my father, my biological father, took me to her sister. But the problem was they didn't come back to pick me up till a year later.
What?
Wow.
So by that time, my who I call my mother, my aunt, my mother, and her husband, um, were like, well, no, we love her. She's our baby. You can't take her. And apparently, so they didn't let me go.
Did they
Uh,
have other children? Your
they did.
yeah.
And I had my little sister, which for many years I was like, why the hell did you guys get rid of me? If you didn't want me, why did you have another kid? Was my thought.
Mhm.
For years, I had this contention with my biological mother. My biological mother was an alcoholic, and when as I got older, when she used to drink in front of anybody and everybody, she would lift up her shirt and says, "You did this to me," and she'll show that big scar that she had on her stomach. So, my mother was a beautiful woman with a beautiful body, and she would always tell me, "You did this to me, and I hate you," and all that other stuff when she was drunk.
Uh,
And so my mom, her sister, who, by the way, they never talked to each other. These two women lived next to each other, same, they never had conversation about hung down, nothing. Would say to me, don't worry about, because I wanted my mother to love me the way she loved her children. And I wanted my biological brothers and sisters to love me the way they loved each other. And that wasn't happening. So I always used to feel like I never belonged, right? So I didn't belong here because that's not, and then I didn't belong with, my mother had 2 kids. She had a son and a daughter. And I knew that they weren't my biological brothers and sisters, right? Although I now call them brothers and sisters, but I always felt like I didn't belong to either one. And one family system was very rigid, the one that raised me. And then the other family system was loose, like anything went in that family system. And I was so conflicted with those 2 values, right? So for many years, my mother said to me, don't worry, because when you get older and you become someone, then your mother will realize, what she gave up. And then, you can ask her, you can do a forgiveness thing, right? So I always thought that my biological mother was always like she became sort of like a friend, like an aunt. And when I came into the recovery process, I then became like, I was no good when I was in my addiction. She wouldn't even look at me. But when I came into the process, she if there was anything wrong with my other brothers and sisters, she would call me. Like I became the social worker of the family, right?
Uh-huh.
And for me, that was like, oh, at least we have some form of relationship, right? And then I said, I was trying to work up and muster up the courage to have the conversation with her, like serious conversation. Why did you give me up? Like that hurt me. Like I always wanted your love, this and this and that. And guess what? She freaking got dementia. So it got to the point where she didn't even recognize who I was. And I felt robbed once again that I wanted to have that moment with her, to have that. And I was like, damn it, shit, I still can't have this conversation with this woman because she doesn't even know who I am, you know? And of course she passed away, but I never had that opportunity. I did come to terms because I remember when she passed away, I was holding her hand at the hospice and the whole family was there, including her sister, the one that raised me. And they were all talking. I had held her hand and I'm trying to look at her breathing and I'm saying, she's still breathing. She's still alive. And then in my head, I said, Soraya, I forgive you and I'm sorry. I forgive you and I'm sorry for feeling what I was feeling towards you. And she stopped breathing. And I was like, oh my God. And I told the rest, says, look, she's not breathing anymore. And of course, everybody started crying and wailing and stuff like that. But I felt like, we made peace.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
it
what
was,
I would have.
it was remarkable. And it, I didn't get the feedback from her or whatever, or, to have the conversation, but I just felt a sense of peace when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that she needed to hear that, even though it was in my thoughts, and I believe very much in energy. And I also needed to do that for my own healing process.
So, Connie, we got a chance to meet you at the Multiple Pathways of Recovery conference. So you are filled with love and light, and that is how you started off light. And so before we talk about how you got to where you are today, can you tell us a little bit about when you started using and how you remarkably got into recovery at age 23?
Yeah. So when we got here from Puerto Rico at about we got here, I was about 5. So between the ages of 7, 8 to about the age of 10. And I just released, after the Multiple Pathways to Recovery conference, I released a YouTube video, which is a little reenactment of my life. And, I was abused by my brother, sexually abused by my brother and my uncle. And I think that spiraled into, I was bullied in school. And I was about in the 4th grade, 5th grade. I know I was a kid. Looking back now, I was like, oh my God, I was just a baby. I thought that I was so grown because so many things had happened to me. And I was like, again, why can't we just go back home? This is not supposed to be happening to me. This is like a nightmare. This is a dream. I'm going to wake up and this is not going, not have happened. But I think that because of all that and, coupled with the environment, right? I remember started using, it was marijuana and of course, alcohol. And then I escalated to, I graduated to cocaine and then eventually, heroin. And when I did heroin, that was like, I found like the perfect thing for me and my feelings, and everything was just so great with, the heroin. And yeah, so many things happened from the age. So from when we got here from Puerto Rico, from when we got here to about the age of when I went into treatment, it was just like a spiral of events from, getting beat up and going to jail and just being homeless and the drugs. It just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And the night, it was March 16, 1985. That night, that's the night that I remember I said, my God, if you get me out of this, I will never get high again. I will never, it was the last thing that happened to me that it was like, girl, you got to do something. That I almost got killed by the drug dealers, 2 sets of drug dealers. And I was right in between that. what happened tonight was the apartment that I was in that my mother left to me became like a den for the drug dealers. And there were two sets of drug dealers, one from, I guess, two sets of drug dealers. And the guy that was in my apartment said to me, he blamed me, accused me of stealing some drugs. And I didn't steal any drugs. And he accused me of stealing the drugs and giving them to the other drug dealers. So I hadn't, and I say it today, like I could say today, yeah, I stole it, but that's not what happened. And I feel like they needed somebody to set up, and I was the one, right? I was the scapegoat. So I was in a ground floor apartment, and the drug dealer inside my apartment had, he had a shotgun, and the other ones are in the courtyard, and they're asking him to come out of the apartment, right? So he said to me, he says, you go out. And I was so scared. I was like, no, well, why do I have to go out? He says, you go out. So when, and this is the thing, when I went to the door that I put my hand on the knob, I prayed and I said, God, please. Cause it was like, if I open the door and they shoot, they're going to shoot. I'm going to be in the middle of the shootout. They're going to shoot in and he's going to shoot out. I'm going to be right in the middle. It's almost like a bulletproof. And I said, when I put my hand on the doorknob, I said, God, please, I don't want to die like this. If you get me out of this, I will never get high again. That was what I was praying. And when I turned the doorknob, I braced myself for the gunshot, and I opened the door, but it didn't happen, and I ran out the courtyard, and rather than to go wherever my mother's, anybody's house, anywhere else, I run across the street to the other drug dealers to try to explain to them that I don't know what you guys are talking about. I don't know what I was thinking. Why did I go there? And as soon as I went in, the guy grabbed me by my neck and put the gun in my face and says, where is it? Blah, 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 blah. And he's yelling and screaming at me. And I'm there looking at the barrel of his gun. And I'm like, fuck it. Like, end it. You shoot me. Just do it. Because I was so tired. I remember I was getting high for days on end. And I just didn't want to. I was just tired. I was just like, fuck it, end it. Like, if this is gonna be it, like, this is it. Because I figured I got out of that one, and now I'm in this one. It's not gonna. There's no way I'm gonna get out of this. Shoot me if that's what you're gonna do, because I don't have your drugs. And that's when my biological mother walks in, and yelling, "Man, I need my daughter!" And she grabbed me and is beating him upside my head and pushing him away. And I remember them standing there like in disbelief that this woman comes into the building, talk about, give me my daughter. What are you doing with my daughter in Spanish? She was like, Amija, and hitting me as she was walking me out the building because there's 3 buildings, and she walks me into her building and she takes me upstairs. And I'm upstairs and I'm, I was numb because I wasn't scared, but I was not numb. And she was like crying and saying, you're going to go to Promesa. And I was like, whatever. I just wanted to go to the bathroom and get high, like more high. That's all I wanted to do. And I didn't want to feel anything. But when I came to, for me, that was like the scariest thing I have ever been through. It wasn't jail time. It wasn't anything. It was just, that could have been the end of me at the age of 23. It's crazy. I was still a baby then. So I'm grateful that she took me out of that situation. My biological mother was she was a tough lady. She was really tough, that woman. And they all looked at her like, really, this lady has the audacity to do some shit like that, right? And somebody must have told her what was happening in the neighborhood for her to come into the building like that and get me out of there. And then she took me upstairs and she says, tomorrow you're going to Promesa. That's the treatment program here in New York City in the Bronx. And I was like, whatever. When the morning came, she took me to the program. And she says, you're staying here and you're not leaving until and prior to that, my mother, the one that raised me, she left to Puerto Rico with my brother. And I was left alone in that apartment. This is how, it's a long story. I was left alone in the apartment and the drug dealers took over it, whatever. And I was lost. I was totally like lost. I had nothing. When my mother left to Puerto Rico, I sold everything in the apartment, the lamps, everything went to hell. And my biological mother was the one that took me to treatment. And so when she left me there, I was like, I remember it was, we got there in the morning. And the reason why I always, when people tell me, when did your process start? I say it was March 17, 1985 at 3:45 p.m. because I waited there all that time. I was already getting sick. And when I looked at the clock, I said, shit, if they don't call me, I'm leaving. I'm going back to the block, right? And as soon as I looked up that I got up to leave, they said, Concepcion Pacheco. I said, shit. And I said, and I went into the intake and never came back out.
Wow.
Thank God.
Was
Thank God.
was your mom in recovery that she knew to get you? No.
Yeah. No.
Wow.
She got old throughout the years and stopped drinking on her own, but she never went into any treatment or had any professional help. But it was her that made that happen for me. And when I came out of Promesa, I went to my biological mother and I said, can I rent a room from you? And she rented a room. I'm her daughter. She rented a room. And I rented a room for about 6 months from her because then all my brothers and sisters were active and she was still drinking. So I had to recover, my recovery process. Like I always say, sometimes you got to recover right where you got high. So the minute that I would see something, I would leave. I would go and do whatever I could not to be around the family while they were using. I had to put a lock in my room so my brothers and sisters wouldn't steal from me. And then I saved my money and then I got a furnished room. And then, after that, I got my own apartment. And then, I got into the field by mistake. I didn't want to be a counselor. I didn't know that I was going to be a counselor, that I was going to do this for a living. But my counselor at the time, I was working at an abortion clinic in my reentry days because I wanted to move out. I needed to move out. And then 3 months after working there, I got, like psychologically, I couldn't do this anymore, right? So I quit and I went to work with a lawyer and I never said anything to my counselor. But then what happened was the lawyer, in treatment, they teach you, I was always cleaning. So my lawyer, the lawyer that I was working with, his office was a mess. And one day I cleaned it up and it was so beautiful. And when he came in, he was like, Connie. And I was like, yes, Mr. Lieberman. It's so proud. He said, did you do this? I said, yes, I did, Mr. Lieberman. He says, you're fired. Who the hell told you to touch my stuff? I was like, what do you mean I'm fired? I did it. And I was so distraught by this man screaming and yelling at me and firing me. And I'm leaving crying. And I'm like, oh my God, now I'm fired. I don't have a job. How am I going to tell my counselor? He's going to put me back in the program. I don't want to go back in. Oh my Jesus God. So go to my counselor and I says, look, I gotta tell you the truth. I quit the abortion clinic. I've been working with a lawyer, but he fired me. Now this happened around the week of Christmas, right? And my counselor said to me, he says, okay, you're going to an interview at such and such place. There was a drug treatment prevention program. And I was like, I don't know anything about counseling. He says, if you don't go, you're moving back in. I said, sure, no problem. I'll go. So I went to the interview, and guess what? The person that interviewed me was the director of Promesa when I first went into Promesa 3 years prior. I thought this lady hated me. So when I saw her, I said, oh my God, she's not going to hire me. And this is what I said to her. I said, and she's still alive and she's a really good friend of mine today. I said, Elizabeth, I don't know a damn thing about counseling, but if you hire me, I won't let you down. And you know what she said to me? She said, all right, you're fucking hired. Come back on January 2nd. And I stood like, what? She said, you heard me, get the fuck out of here, just like that. And I said, okay. And I went to that interview on a bicycle. And I didn't ask how much you were paying me. Nothing. I went there January 2nd and I started my job as a counselor, a prevention counselor in a prevention program working with adolescents. As I moved up in the ranks in the field from counselor to supervisor, clinical director, whatever, I hit the ceiling and I couldn't get anything else unless I went and got more education. So I said, I'm going to go. And that's what I did. I got my bachelor's and then I got my master's. And then
you said you hit a glass ceiling. And the ceiling was that you didn't have enough education. However, if you were working for me and I saw how skilled and competent you were, what difference did that degree that you got, I think it's a master's in social work, right?
Yeah.
Did that improve your skills as a clinician or a counselor?
Not really, because seriously, not really. I'm going to tell you why. Because here I am sitting in this classroom. I went to Yeshiva University in New York City, which is predominantly Jewish, and most of they were kids. I'm an adult. I'm an older woman now, getting a master's, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, so everything they're teaching, all the theory that I've been practicing and learning in the field. And I had all these old shit moments, right? And I was like, oh, wow. So I had to take a back seat because I was like, I sort of kind of know this stuff. So it came very easy. However, I had an instructor who had it out for me, and she made my life difficult getting that master's. At one point, she says to me, you're participating too much, you know, because I had all the answers, right? And then I said, okay, let me take a back seat. I get it, right? And then she said, well, you're not participating enough. And I'm like, hey, what do you want from me? Like, what do you want from me, you know? And a lot of the papers that I wrote had to do with a lot of my experiences. And it was almost like, you know, how are you going to almost belittle that's my life we're talking about, you know? That really happened. It's almost like, and so I would take a life experience and then relate it to a theory, you know, Freud or Erickson or whatever have you, whatever theory it was. And she had an issue with that. I'm like, I'm sorry, but I've been through some shit, you know what I mean? And so it wasn't easy getting that. It was like I was the only one in my family to ever do that.
Well, that irritates the heck out of me, actually. That like a teacher would have it out for a student, or there might be a case where the teacher is actually trying to get the best out of the student, but it didn't sound like that the way you relayed it.
Envy.
Uh-huh.
It's envy.
Well, it's the idea that, for me, a lot of academia is putting out these theories, but when people have actually lived it and know it and can articulate it, it's like you knew a lot of the stuff they were teaching. You just probably didn't have the concept or the theory that they were ascribing to, right?
Right.
And I'm laughing because I'm 57 years old, 60% through my MSW program. So I feel all your comments for sure.
Well, I think, I think that overall is a flaw in our system, that we base billing, we base funding, we base competency on the level of education and disregard a person's experience. So for me, running a nonprofit, it's about hiring the person with their skills. We're not hiring the degree. So, you know, we believe so strongly in that concept that we don't have any education requirements for any position here in CCAR. It's not to say that that won't work for you, but it's not required to apply or not required to get a job. So, but congratulations to you. I know that's almost like the battler in you too, the fighter, that you saw that through to the end. I appreciate that. I admire that in you, actually.
Thank you. I feel the same way too. You know, sometimes I have students that come through here and they want to train, they want to teach, and I take them under my wing because, and they might not have the educational background, but they're awesome. You know, and they get it and they can give it away. And I'm like, you know, and they sometimes have, do I need to have a bachelor's to do this? I said, no, you just need to, you know, come on, let's do it. And I wholeheartedly believe in that. You know, you can't trade somebody's experience for, you know, a piece of paper. Just can't.
I don't even know if it's experience. I think it's just an innate skill a lot of times to look for the right question, to connect with people, to offer empathy, compassion, nurturing in a kind manner. Your whole art of coaching or connecting or counseling, you have to learn that. And a lot of it is you're also gifted with it too. It's a both and. I wish
Yeah,
we
I agree.
I wish we could train everybody, teach everybody to it.
So what's life like today?
Oh my God, life is beautiful today. It took me a long time to get to where I'm at. Right now, I started Recoveries R US with a nothing. I was not employed. I was unemployed, still going to school, and I just wanted to do. I wanted to have a school that was a little different than the ones like the one that I used to teach or the ones that I've seen. So when the students come through here, it's not just about the material, the curriculum. I make sure that, sometimes I look at just maybe one little behavior. I don't have them here for long, but one little thing that you can improve or modify that'll make you that much more of a better person. And so I call it professional development, but it could be anything. It could be, the way you speak. It could be it could just be anything, the way you dress, anything. And so we're very, I'm very close to my students, I'm very in their process. And when I see, when they get a job, whether as a coach or a peer advocate or a counselor, that's when the pay comes in. You know what I mean? That's when the
Mhm.
like, they did it. That's great. And I seen that transformation, and I love it. And so I'm small. We're very small in size, but we're growing. I went from one classroom to three classrooms right now, and I love it. I love what I do.
Is there anything else you'd like us to know? Anything about Recovery Matters that you want to share that we haven't covered?
For me, in my trajectory today, every day is a new day, a new beginning to just practice your recovery again. Because what I was recovering from yesterday is not the same thing that I'm going to be recovering from today. And so I just think that it just never ends, every day you find something new about yourself. And I always used to say like reoccurrences, right? When you have a reoccurrence, you can have a reoccurrence not from drugs and alcohol. You have a reoccurrence when you just sort of kind of lose it on somebody, or when, you allow your feelings to get the best of you. To me, that's a reoccurrence. Or when you have, a not so good relationship with somebody, to me, that's a reoccurrence. And I have to bring it back to myself and put into practice real quick whatever I learn about recovery into my everyday interactions. So when people say, I had a relapse or I had a reoccurrence, it's like, well, we do that all the time. It just may not necessarily be with alcohol and drugs. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about that.
That's an
That's
amazing point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Connie. I hope that our paths cross again.
Thank you, Connie. Continue.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.